Welcome to this module titled Extending Thinking that was designed and produced by GoTeach11. Your journey starts here. In the previous module, you learned formative assessment techniques for checking students' understanding. In this module, you'll learn a method for creating questions at different levels of difficulty to ensure every student is challenged appropriately. Then, we'll shift over to student responses, where you'll learn a technique to help students elaborate their responses and make even deeper connections. Your learning will be assessed within the context of a 10-minute mini lesson. To receive credit for this module, you must ask at least 2 higher-order thinking questions that are beyond basic recall. You must also help extend at least one student's response using the Stretch It technique. We'll read one technique in Teach Like a Champion 2.0 and watch a related video clip, so you'll want to have your copy of the book handy as we progress through the learning. We know our focus, how we'll be assessed, and what we'll need, so let's crank up our learning. In the previous module, we learned about quick writes, cold call, show me, and exit tickets. In each of these techniques, we pose a question in an effort to gauge comprehension. The responses tell us a lot about the levels of thinking that are taking place. To elicit the right sort of response, we'll need to ask the right sort of question, and that's the focus of the first part of this module. Levels of questions is a hot topic in education, and there are several frameworks for rigor and questioning, each of which has its own nuances and descriptions. Just for the sake of listing and identifying a few, we'll mention Webb's Depth of Knowledge, Marzano's New Taxonomy, Wiggin and McTighe's Essential Questions, and of course the one we're most familiar with, Bloom's Taxonomy. Whatever educational entity you work for will likely reference one of these frameworks. Instead of presenting and comparing each of these, we'll summarize the main idea. We need to ask different levels of questions to students because they elicit different levels of response. Beginning of unit or beginning of lesson questions should generally be more basic. End of lesson or end of unit questions should generally be more complex and require deeper levels of response. The rubric for this module requires you to include at least 2 higher order thinking questions that are beyond basic recall. So, out of all the questions that you deliver using formative assessment techniques, 2 will need to be higher order thinking. As a review, when we say higher order thinking, we mean that the questions require students to make connections amongst 2 or more ideas or concepts. Administrators will often push hot questions in meetings. They'll say, be sure to include a hot question in your lesson plans. Write it on your board. I want to see your essential question. A hot question is an abbreviation for a higher order thinking question. We mentioned there are several frameworks for levels of rigor, thinking, and questioning. There's also several resources and stems for creating different types of questions. You may come across a cue chart, questioning chart, or questioning matrix that are similar but slightly different to the one that we have on the screen here. This particular question matrix can be used to help generate questions at different levels. As we move to the right and to the bottom, questions generally get more rigorous, and we could potentially label them as higher order thinking questions. Using the question stems what, who, where, when, combined with is, are, do, does, did, and can, allow for basic recall and identification, which are considered to be the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Examples are, what is volume? Who invented the light bulb? And where's the setting? These are basic, necessary questions that we ask time and time again to help students memorize essential information. I want to be clear that we cannot say that all questions that use these stems are lower level questions because the context makes all the difference. Questions like, what's the meaning of life? What is real? Who is the most important person on earth? What is art? What isn't art? These aren't simple questions. They require justification, explanation. You can't simply Google an answer and see the same answer on all the lists of pages. These sims are just simply guides to help creating those basic questions, but there are certainly exceptions. Questions that use how and why combined with would, should, will, might, and could generally require students to make deeper connections and explain with rationale. The answer isn't always right there, and it causes students to apply different sets of knowledge. Using these stems, I came up with some examples. What might happen next? How can we predict what number will be next in the sequence? What would change if we added a new variable? Why might they have an issue with a new law? How could we improve our performance? How does adding this color affect the tone of the work? And when might we play zone defense? We could classify these as higher order thinking questions because they require more than a one-word answer and they require application of more than one idea. Question matrices and question stems are super helpful in varying your question types. Imagine preparing different levels of questions and asking them within the context of a cold call situation. You could ask more simple questions for some students and reserve more complex questions for students you know have basic mastery. In addition, you could consider presenting students a chart that's similar to this one and ask them to generate their own questions about a text or a math problem. I hope you found this to be a helpful tool for creating your higher level thinking questions. We've gone over some of the big, basic ideas, but if you're wanting even more information and wanting to make more connections to Bloom's taxonomy, I recommend checking out the IDRA PDF. IDRA stands for the Intercultural Development Research Association. In the Canvas resources for this module, or conducting your own search about question levels and question stems. Up to this point, we've shared a resource for creating higher level questions. Now we'll transition to knowing what to do when students provide a somewhat limited response to your question and you're wanting to help them construct deeper thought. The responses students provide to your questions contain data that inform the next steps in teaching. The responses also provide additional opportunities for deeper connections. Doug Lemov provides a technique called Stretch It in Teach Like a Champion 2.0. This technique helps extend students' thinking and gives you an opportunity to challenge learners. Read about the Stretch It technique on pages 108 to 116. Think about how you can help students extend their thinking after they respond to the questions you ask. Watch clip 16 in my.teachlikeachampion.com to see a teacher use the Stretch It technique in a secondary ELA setting. In summary, there are 6 basic methods to the Stretch It technique. Of course, first we need to provide a question, then listen to the response, and then we have them stretch the response so we can confirm the reliability of their answer and make sure it's not a fluke. Different ways to extend their thinking includes having students explain how they know, such as, how do you know the number is odd? Having them provide evidence is a similar way to extend thinking. What line lets you know that? Or what part of the composition shows you're correct? Answering with a better word or answering in a different way could help your students use the academic vocabulary involved in the unit, or can show that students have processed the information and can explain it sufficiently. The 2 boxes on the right side relate to connecting other skills, concepts, or ideas. Some examples are, how might this idea be related to today? Or, how can we use this information when we solve problems in the future? If you're interested in a PDF of this slide, we've made it available to you in the Canvas resources for this module. Congratulations! You've completed your learning for this module. The next few slides will help provide even more clarity so you can be successful for this portion of the lesson lab. To receive credit for this course, 2 of the questions you ask using formative assessment techniques must be higher order thinking questions that are beyond basic recall. In addition, you'll need to use a stretch it technique to extend at least one student's response. For that extra challenge, encourage responses to be in complete sentences. And promote active listening by asking a student to agree, disagree, or add on to a different student's response. Here we have a few tips to help you with your mini lesson. First, start with the teaks and then find a text that's connected to the teaks. The text could be a short passage, a short biography. It could be a math problem, an artwork, or even sheet music. Decide what you'll directly teach and what formative assessment techniques you'll use to gauge students' understanding. Once you have your topic or text, use the question chart to draft 5 to 8 questions. Some should be basic, some should be complex. You'll need to have at least 2 higher order thinking questions. It's okay to write these questions down and refer to them during your mini lesson, as it's realistic that you would ask the questions that you pre-plan. After you've drafted your questions, think about how students might respond to them. Explicitly plan for which stretch it technique is most applicable to the questions that you ask. Again, if you want to have a copy of the stretch it visual by you, that's okay. Just be sure you're familiar with the process of extending students' thinking so it appears natural and doesn't take too much extra time. The stretch it visual might be even something that you keep posted in your classroom so that you're transparent with students about providing detailed responses. Thanks for watching this video module titled Extending Thinking that was designed and produced by GoTeach11. This video referred to content from Vanderbilt University, the Intercultural Development Research Association, as well as Doug Lamov's Teach Like a Champion 2.0. Pictures were downloaded from 123RF.